Are you blind, Aaron? You can't just leave things lying around out here. That was the first thing I heard when I stepped onto my porch that morning. Sophia Maynson's voice sharp enough to cut through the quiet Maplewood air. She stood in the middle of the cul-de-sac, arms crossed, like she'd been waiting all night for me to open the door. 8 months ago, when I first moved here after my divorce, I thought Maplewood was exactly what I needed. Clean lawns, quiet evenings, a chance to start over. But nothing prepares you for an HOA president who treats the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. And as I watched her grip a package with my name on it, something inside me clicked. This wasn't concern. This was bold-faced theft, and I finally had proof. My name is Aaron Hales, a 34-year-old man who quit his job earlier and starts finding peace. I didn't expect to be starting over in a quiet Minnesota suburb, but life pushes you into corners you never planned for. I'm a corporate field engineer by trade, long hours, lots of travel, and even more problem-solving, which made stability feel like a luxury. Maplewood seemed like the right place to rebuild. Clean streets, steady routines, lawns so neatly trimmed it almost looked staged. After the divorce, I needed somewhere that didn't remind me of arguments, slammed doors, or the version of myself I didn't want to be anymore. When I signed the lease, the realtor bragged about how peaceful the neighborhood was. Good people here, she told me, smiling like she was handing me a gift, and for a while, I believed her. I'd sit on the back patio with coffee on weekends, listening to sprinklers clicking on one yard after another as the sun came up. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't drowning. Then the packages started disappearing. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone loses a delivery now and then. I assumed it was a driver mistake or someone grabbed the wrong porch. I let it slide, but when it kept happening, small things at first, then important items, I started to feel that tightening in my gut, the one that whispers, something isn't right. I work from home more than half the week, so I knew when deliveries were supposed to arrive. And somehow, the boxes kept vanishing in the one window of time I wasn't watching the porch. Too coincidental. Too precise. One morning, I caught a glimpse of someone walking away with a familiar shape under their arm. Blonde hair, pastel sweater, a clipboard. I only saw her for a few seconds, but the realization hit me like a slap. Sophia Maynson, the HOA president. She had already left an impression the first week I moved in, showing up unannounced to welcome me, while also handing me a list of community expectations thick enough to qualify as a novel. Everything about her radiated control. She wasn't just an HOA president. She was the self-appointed queen of Maplewood. And apparently, she thought my packages fell under her jurisdiction too. At first, I doubted myself. Maybe she was moving them for safety. Maybe she was delivering them to a community locker. Maybe she was holding them for me, because in some neighborhoods that's normal, right? But that wasn't Sophia. She didn't do favors. She issued commands. And each time I questioned it, another delivery vanished. Medication for my dad, a part one needed for work, even a birthday gift I ordered for my nephew. All gone. That was when suspicion hardened into intent. I spent a whole evening researching porch cameras and ordered 2 different models, one obvious, one hidden. I mounted the large one right by the door, so it looked like a standard home security upgrade. The second one, small enough to disappear against the railing, faced the street. If she was bold enough to take things off my porch, I wanted every angle recorded. I didn't tell anyone. Not the neighbors, not co-workers, not the folks I sometimes chatted with during morning walks. I wanted to see how far she'd go when she thought no one was watching. The next week, the pattern repeated itself. A package notification hit my phone. I checked outside. There it was. I stepped away for a coffee refill, came back, and the box was gone. But this time, I didn't feel frustration. I felt anticipation. When I reviewed the footage that evening, there she was, Sophia, strolling across the lawn like she owned the place, picking up the package, looking around just long enough to convince herself she was alone, then marching it back toward her house. She didn't even hesitate. My hands actually shook, not with anger, but with the certainty that now I had her. Proof. Real proof. And once you catch someone red-handed, you can start planning the real revenge. And I was already thinking about the purple dye trap. It started as a joke in my head. Something petty. Something that would embarrass her just enough to feel fair. But the more footage I watched, the more I replayed her smug expression and self-appointed authority, the more the idea evolved into a plan. A bold one. A messy one. One she wouldn't forget. After reviewing the footage the third time, I realized Sophia didn't just steal packages out of convenience. She did it because she could, because the neighborhood belonged to her in her mind, and anyone who dared to challenge her authority, even subtly, was fair game. It gnawed at me, not just the theft, but the principle of it. I wasn't going to sit here and let someone like that rewrite the rules of my life. I spent the next few days documenting everything. Dates, times, deliveries, the angle of the sun for each theft. I even kept notes on her walks, how she carried her clipboard, the precise way she opened her mailbox, the cadence of her morning steps. There was a rhythm to her movements, and understanding it gave me a small thrill of control. It was almost like a game, except she didn't know the rules had changed. Work was a welcome distraction. My corporate engineering projects kept me busy, but my mind always drifted back to the porch. I'd sit in conference calls, sketching layouts for camera angles, testing theories about package placement, and imagining the perfect payoff. The mundane walls of my home office suddenly felt like the command center of a high-stakes operation. One evening, I decided to test a small experiment. I ordered a series of decoy packages. Cheap items, innocuous, nothing valuable, but each one marked clearly with my name. I positioned them in varying spots on the porch. I wanted to see if Sophia would go for the most visible one, or she had a particular routine she followed. Within hours, the obvious package had vanished. The footage revealed everything. Sophia, walking briskly across my lawn, checking the street for witnesses, smiling faintly as if she were enjoying a private joke. That smile made my stomach twist. I wanted to wipe it off her face. Neighbors started noticing little things, too. Some commented on seeing her near my porch more often, whispering to each other about her enthusiasm for neighborhood security. I stayed silent, keeping my observations to myself. It wasn't paranoia, it was strategy. I was learning her habits, noting the gaps in her timing, understanding the small window where no one else would interfere. And then it hit me. The perfect opportunity was within reach. A single package, innocuous looking, just like the others, but rigged with purple dye. Not dangerous, not harmful, just humiliating. The image of her face, covered in bright purple, a suburban joker for the cul-de-sac to see, filled me with a mix of relief and amusement. For 8 months, she treated the neighborhood like her personal stage. It was time for a scene where the spotlight hit her in return, but I didn't act immediately. Timing was everything. I watched the weather forecasts, noting the sunny afternoons that would ensure the dye would show vividly, making the effect unforgettable. I considered every delivery schedule, every step she usually took across the lawns. It had to be flawless. One mistake, and it could backfire. In the meantime, I started noticing other small things about life in Maplewood that reminded me why I moved here in the first place. Kids riding bikes, the scent of fresh-cut grass in the morning, the quiet hum of sprinklers. I reminded myself that revenge wasn't about ruining the neighborhood. It was about restoring balance, reclaiming a small piece of normalcy. Sophia had tilted the scales, and I was merely setting them straight. By the end of the week, the package was ready. I marked it carefully, choosing the right box, ensuring the weight felt real, the label authentic. I double-checked the hidden camera angles, making sure every possible approach Sophia might take was captured. It was meticulous work, but I felt alive. For the first time since moving here, I had a sense of control over something outside of my work, my divorce, and my own mundane routines. And through it all, Sophia remained oblivious. She strutted past my porch each morning, unaware that the person she considered a quiet, rule-abiding neighbor was watching, planning, and waiting. Soon, all of Maplewood would see her for exactly who she really was. And I have proof that some rules were meant to be enforced in ways she could never ignore. I could feel the tension in my chest the morning I decided it was time. The purple-dyed package was ready, perfectly disguised among the others, sitting innocently on the porch like any other delivery. I stepped back, letting the sunlight hit it just right so it looked ordinary. My hands trembled, not from fear but anticipation. For 8 months, Sophia Maynson had treated me, my property, and our neighborhood like her personal stage. Today, the spotlight was about to hit her. I grabbed my coffee, sat on the railing, and watched through the hidden camera on my phone. The footage was crisp, almost cinematic, showing every house, every lawn, every leaf trembling in a morning breeze. I could see neighbors leaving for work, kids biking down the street, nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, I knew that ordinary was about to get spectacularly disrupted. Sophia appeared at the end of the street, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the mailboxes and front porches. She didn't even notice the box yet. She was focused, confident, unaware of the trap that awaited. I felt a surge of exhilaration. This wasn't just revenge, it was poetic justice. Every smirk she had worn when holding my missing packages would be mirrored on my own face, and the entire cul-de-sac would witness it. I rehearsed in my mind the sequence of events. She would approach the porch, pick up the box, and casually inspect it, thinking it was just another ordinary delivery. Then, with a subtle pull on the lid, the purple dye would explode, covering her from head to toe in a vivid, humiliating spectacle. It would stain her clothes, her clipboard, even her perfectly coiffed hair. And the best part? The hidden cameras would catch every angle, every gasp, every reaction. My heart raced as she drew closer. Time seemed to stretch. I held my phone like a lifeline, watching her feet, her hands, the way she carried herself with supreme confidence. My thumb hovered over the camera app, ready to capture the moment for posterity. I imagined the neighborhood windows lighting up with shocked faces, kids laughing, neighbors pointing, some sneaking discreet videos with their own phones. It was all coming together, every tiny piece falling into place. And then, as if she had read my thoughts, Sophia's gaze shifted to the porch. Her eyes locked onto the purple package. A flicker of curiosity, perhaps suspicion, crossed her face, but she dismissed it, assuming it was just another delivery. I grinned. That moment of ignorance would be her undoing. She bent down, lifting the lid, and the dye erupted. The purple explosion was instantaneous and magnificent. It shot upward and outward, coating her cardigan, her blouse, even splattering the clipboard she clutched like armor. She screamed, a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief, stumbling backward into the walkway. I laughed aloud, a deep, satisfying laugh that echoed across my porch. The hidden cameras caught everything, the splatter, the shock, the embarrassment. The cul-de-sac had a front row seat to her humiliation, even if they didn't know yet who had orchestrated it. From my porch, I could see neighbors emerging from their driveways, phones out, laughing, whispering, filming. Some waved at me as if to say, "Finally!" It was surreal, a moment of pure justice executed perfectly. Sophia, now coated in shocking violet, tried to regain her composure, but it was too late. The irony was beautiful. The woman who had spent months policing others' minor infractions was herself the center of a stain she could not erase. And yet, beneath the triumph, a strange satisfaction took hold. This wasn't cruelty, it was restoration. For months, she had violated boundaries, overstepped her authority, and toyed with my life and property. Today, she got a taste of the same spectacle she had forced on others. And unlike before, there was evidence. Clear, undeniable, and completely hers. I leaned back on the railing, coffee in hand, watching the aftermath unfold. She flailed, shrieked, and finally trudged into her house, leaving a trail of purple on the walkway. I reviewed the footage again, zooming in on every angle, every splash, every expression. The cul-de-sac would never look at her the same way again. And I had reclaimed my little piece of Maplewood, proving that even in the quietest suburbs, some rules could and should be enforced with style. The next morning, Maplewood was buzzing, though the neighborhood had never had buzz like this before. I stepped out onto my porch with a steaming cup of coffee, scanning the cul-de-sac. Cars were parked haphazardly along the street, neighbors pointing and laughing, and I could see flashes of phones recording, sharing, laughing. The purple stain on Sophia Maynson's cardigan was still visible from her front lawn, proof that yesterday's spectacle had not been a dream. She emerged reluctantly from her house, hair disheveled, clothes streaked in violet. Her clipboard drooped in her hand like a defeated banner. Normally, she would stride down the street, barking orders, pointing fingers, making everyone feel small. But yesterday, she moved slowly, almost carefully, avoiding eye contact, aware that every glance from neighbors was a judgment she could not escape. I couldn't help but grin. Justice, as I'd envisioned it, was unfolding perfectly. But the story didn't end with laughter. This was Maplewood, where gossip traveled faster than the morning sun. By mid-morning, I overheard a neighbor telling another how the HOA queen finally got a taste of her own medicine. Another joked about starting a group chat just to share the footage, and I felt a quiet thrill knowing the purple package had made me a sort of quiet hero. It was during this chaos that I realized how deeply Sophia's actions had affected everyone. People weren't just laughing. They were finally speaking openly about the small tyranny she had enforced for months. Complaints that had previously been whispered now surfaced. Lawn maintenance fines, petty criticisms, absurd bylaws. Neighbors began to share their frustrations, as if yesterday's event had granted them permission to speak freely. I leaned against my railing, taking mental notes. Even without confrontation, The purple dye had shifted the neighborhood balance of power, but there were risks. Sophia was not someone who would disappear quietly. I had seen her type, prideful, vindictive, and relentless. Yesterday's humiliation had been spectacular, yes, but it had also provoked her. I needed to anticipate her next move. Would she confront me directly? File complaints? Try to dig into my personal life? Or call the police claiming harassment? Every scenario ran through my mind as I sipped coffee, my eyes scanning the cul-de-sac and the movements of neighbors, each step calculated, each gesture analyzed. I decided it was time to escalate strategically. The cameras had captured everything, not just Sophia's humiliation, but the reactions of everyone around. I downloaded footage, backed it up, and even edited a few clips to ensure clarity, angles, and dramatic effect. I wasn't planning to post them publicly yet. This was leverage, a silent reminder that while the neighborhood could laugh, the story was far from over. By noon, Sophia made her move. She approached my house, clipboard in hand, voice trembling with fury she could barely contain. "Aaron Hales, what do you think you're doing? This is harassment." Her usual confidence had evaporated, leaving only desperation. I opened the door slowly, smiling calmly. "Good morning, Sophia. Did you spill something?" I asked, gesturing toward the faint violet stains still clinging to her sleeves. Her expression shifted from anger to disbelief to the faintest hint of calculation. She realized I had planned this carefully. She realized the cameras had captured her in undeniable, embarrassing detail. And she realized, perhaps, that she was no longer the one controlling Maplewood. It was a strange moment of satisfaction, watching someone who had held authority over the entire cul-de-sac reduced to a cautious, almost fearful version of herself. I knew this wasn't the end. Sophia would recover, regroup, and likely attempt retaliation in some way. But for the first time in months, the neighborhood and I had the upper hand. As I closed the door, I leaned back on the railing, coffee warm in my hands, and let myself savor the small victory. Maplewood felt different now. Alive, a little chaotic, a little human. The neat lawns and picket fences still stood, but beneath them, the story of one man standing up against authority had begun to ripple. And from the shadows of strategy and observation, I was ready for whatever came next. The morning after the purple dye incident, Maplewood felt different, electric with whispers and suppressed laughter. As I stepped onto my porch, I noticed the subtle shifts in the neighborhood. Neighbors walking a little taller, exchanging quick glances, some giving me a discreet thumbs up. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone, including Sophia, knew it. But Sophia wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. By mid-morning, I spotted her pacing near her front lawn, muttering under her breath, clipboard clutched tightly. She was carefully watching my house, measuring my movements, trying to figure out if I had set another trap. The purple dye hadn't just embarrassed her. It had ignited a spark of paranoia. I smiled to myself. This was exactly the reaction I wanted. Months of stolen packages, petty fines, and unreasonable rules had led to this. And now, for the first time, she was unsettled. I felt a rush of vindication, but I also knew better than to underestimate her. Sophia might be humiliated, but she wasn't powerless. She would test limits, look for loopholes, and probably consult legal counsel to regain her authority. That afternoon, I noticed a group of neighbors gathering near their driveways, quietly chatting. I overheard snippets of conversation, stories of Sophia's minor tyrannies, previous fines, arbitrary warnings, all long-held grievances coming to light. The purple dye incident had broken the dam of fear. People were finally speaking openly. Even Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, normally quiet, were recounting the time Sophia had fined them for trimming a bush too aggressively. Meanwhile, I continued to monitor Sophia. She checked her mailbox obsessively, rearranged her porch plants, and even glanced toward my house multiple times, as if expecting something else. Each glance, each cautious movement, reassured me that my plan had worked not just as revenge, but as a psychological shift. The neighborhood was alive in a new way, no longer cowering under her authority. I decided it was time to escalate subtly, reinforcing the lesson. I began documenting every interaction she attempted, every errand she undertook, every community meeting she dominated, not to humiliate her further, but to ensure that if she tried to rebuild her power, we would all be ready. Every clip I stored, every observation noted, became a piece of leverage. By evening, Sophia approached me directly. Her tone was sharp, controlled, but I could see the tension behind it. "Aaron, this has gone too far," she said, clipboard tucked on her arm. I replied calmly, leaning against a railing, coffee in hand. I think you mean it's finally gone the way it should. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue further. She knew I was right, and she knew the neighborhood had seen her fall. After she retreated, I reviewed the footage again. Every reaction, every laugh, every whispered conversation was there. Maplewood had witnessed her humiliation, and it had awakened something in the community. Even if she tried to reassert control, the balance had shifted permanently. That night, I sat on the porch under the stars, reflecting on the week's events. The green lawns, the quiet streets, the perfect suburban calm, all it was now layered with a sense of justice finally served. I felt a strange pride, not just in my own planning, but in the subtle awakening of the neighborhood. Maplewood was still beautiful, still calm, but it gained a new edge, a new awareness. And in that quiet moment, I realized something important. Revenge is satisfying, yes, but real victory comes from balance. Sophia Maynson had overstepped, and Maplewood had responded. I had merely been the catalyst. The next steps would be careful, strategic, ensuring that her authority could never again dominate the cul-de-sac unchecked. I sipped my coffee, thinking about the days ahead. There was more to do, more boundaries to reinforce, more subtle lessons to teach. But for the first time since moving here, I felt the quiet satisfaction of control. And it wasn't malicious. It was justice, meticulously planned, perfectly executed, and witnessed by everyone who mattered. By the following week, Maplewood had settled into a strange rhythm. Neighbors still whispered and laughed about the purple dye incident, but the dynamic was shifting subtly. Sophia Maynson, once the unchallenged authority, was now tentative, glancing toward my house more often than not. I noticed the way she adjusted her steps, her clipboard held tighter, her voice quieter whenever she interacted with others. The very air of confidence she had worn like armor was gone, replaced with something fragile and jittery. It didn't surprise me. Months of unchecked authority had led to a single moment of spectacular embarrassment, and she hadn't recovered. But I also knew better than to assume the battle was over. Pride can drive even the humiliated to extreme measures, and Sophia was nothing if not prideful. I had to stay several steps ahead. That afternoon, she tried subtle retaliation. I caught glimpses of her adjusting signs, leaving small notes at neighbors' doors, even questioning delivery schedules at the local post office. Nothing overt, nothing illegal, just enough to create tension and remind everyone that she still held influence. I observed all of it hidden behind my porch railing, coffee in hand, taking mental notes. Every step, every twitch of frustration, became data for my strategy. Neighbors continued to shift their allegiance subtly. Some, emboldened by the dye incident, began speaking more openly at HOA meetings or simply ignoring her petty directives. Others, still cautious, quietly nodded in agreement when someone referenced Sophia's recent humiliation. It was as if the cul-de-sac had collectively decided that the rules of engagement had changed. I watched it all with a mixture of satisfaction and calculation. One evening, Sophia knocked on my door. Her usual sharpness was softened by a careful attempt at diplomacy. "Aaron, I think we need to talk," she said, clipboard clutched awkwardly. I invited her in, keeping my expression neutral. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table I had used for surveillance and planning. Her tone was measured, but I could sense the tremor beneath her words. She was testing me, trying to gauge my reactions, hoping I might slip up. I remained calm. "Of course," I said. "What's on your mind?" I poured myself a cup of coffee and gestured toward the empty porch, as if to indicate that everything was peaceful now. Sophia hesitated, then launched into a litany of grievances, petty complaints about package placement, minor HOA rules, and some vague hints about community respect. I nodded, listening, asking small clarifying questions, letting her exhaust herself. The strategy was simple. Let her expose her own tactics while maintaining complete control over the conversation. As she left, frustrated and muttering under her breath, I felt a quiet thrill of psychological victory. She was still dangerous, still calculating, but she was no longer the dominant force in Maplewood. And more importantly, I knew she had realized I could anticipate her every move. Every step she took, every effort at intimidation, was now part of a larger game she couldn't control. That night, I reviewed the footage again, documenting every nuance of her behavior. I created timelines, highlighted shifts in posture, mapped neighborhood reactions. The purple dye incident had been spectacular, yes, but the ongoing psychological advantage was even more satisfying. I realized that true control wasn't about humiliation alone. It was about influence, subtle, pervasive, and undeniable. For the first time since moving to Maplewood, I felt fully in command of my little domain. The lawn still gleamed, the streets remained quiet, but beneath the surface, the neighborhood was awake. Sophia was cautious. Neighbors emboldened, and I, watching it all unfold, understood the subtle power of patience, observation, and perfectly timed action. The stage was set. The final act was approaching, and as I sipped my coffee, watching the sunset illuminate the cul-de-sac, I smiled. Maplewood would never forget this week, and neither would Sophia. But neither would I forget the lesson. In a world ruled by petty authority, strategy and timing are the ultimate weapons. By the start of the next week, Maplewood had reached a tipping point. Sophia Maynson's subtle retaliations, notes, complaints, and sideways glances had only strengthened the community's resolve. The purple dye incident had become the defining moment of the neighborhood, whispered about in driveways, over morning coffees, and across backyard fences. Everyone now knew what had happened, and the collective confidence of my neighbors was palpable. I could see Sophia walking carefully along the cul-de-sac, her clipboard clutched like a shield, eyes darting toward my porch every few steps. She had clearly learned that any aggressive move on her part would be met with scrutiny. I watched the hidden camera, analyzing her posture, her hesitation, and even the way she shuffled her feet. Every small detail was data. Every small mistake she made was leverage. It was during one of these walks that I saw her stop abruptly at the corner mailbox. A neighbor, Mr. Thompson, had taken the liberty of leaving a small purple-stained note from the previous incident atop it, an anonymous reminder of her embarrassment. I chuckled quietly. It was like the community itself was joining my strategy. Sophia's shoulders stiffened, her gaze flicking towards several houses, and I could almost see the gears turning in her head. Later that afternoon, Sophia made her last attempt at reclaiming control. She approached me at my porch again, this time flanked by 2 other HOA members, a stern-looking couple who had never spoken to me directly before. "Aaron, we need to discuss the boundaries you're overstepping," she said, voice clipped, trying to mask a faint tremor. I smiled, calmly setting my coffee on the railing. "I'm happy to discuss it," I replied. "But perhaps we should include everyone, neighbors, cameras, and records included. Transparency seems fair, doesn't it?" Her face went pale, and the couple shifted uncomfortably. The threat of exposure hung in the air like a silent gavel. Sophia realized that her authority had been publicly undermined, that the neighborhood had seen her overreach, and that any attempt to regain power could now be documented and broadcast in countless ways. The psychological balance had tipped completely. Over the next few hours, she retreated into her house, frustrated, muttering under her breath. The neighbors had eyes on every porch, every lawn, every window. Rumors of fines being overturned, complaints rescinded, and HOA authority question began circulating immediately. I watched quietly from my porch, a mixture of relief and triumph washing over me. Maplewood was no longer under Sophia's thumb. By evening, the neighborhood had begun to normalize, but in a new order, one defined by fairness and accountability. The purple dye incident had served as a catalyst, and I had learned that subtle strategy, patience, and well-timed action could shift an entire community dynamic. For the first time in months, Maplewood felt alive, human, and just. I leaned back in my chair, coffee cooling in my hand, and reflected on the past weeks. 8 months of subtle harassment, petty theft, and community intimidation had culminated in this moment. Not through force, but through careful planning, observation, and a little creativity. Sophia Maynson had received the lesson she needed. The neighborhood had reclaimed its voice, and I had protected my own peace. As the sun set over the quiet cul-de-sac, casting golden light across the green lawns and white picket fences, I felt a deep sense of closure. Maplewood was restored, its community awakened, and I had finally carved out a space where I could live without fear of overreach. The HOA queen had fallen, and justice, in its own cinematic way, had been served. It was a victory not of malice, but of strategy, patience, and the subtle power of standing up for oneself. And in that moment, I knew one truth. Sometimes, the quietest streets hide the most dramatic stories, and Maplewood would never forget mine. Maplewood will never forget what happened. Sophia Maynson thought she ruled the neighborhood, but sometimes justice comes in the most unexpected ways. The purple dye incident changed everything, and the neighborhood finally regained its voice. Thanks for following my story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more HOA drama and real-life revenge tales.